Rain, coming down in sheets, hard enough to drown out the sound of running feet. A boy slips through a side door into the dark and does not look back. Behind him, a building full of sleeping children. Ahead of him, nothing but cold fields, black trees, and a long road leading nowhere. He has no plan, no money to speak of, no place in all the world that would take him in. Only a single photograph and a fear too heavy to carry another night. He runs until his legs give out, until the rain has soaked him to the bone, until, at the very end of a forgotten road, a shape rises out of the dark. A house, abandoned, waiting, and somehow he feels it watching him back. Some doors close behind us, others are about to open. At the end of a long country road, where the gravel gave way to weeds and the fences leaned like tired old men, there stood a mailbox. It was small, rusted at the seams. The little red flag had fallen off years before, and the post beneath it had begun to soften with rot. On the side of that mailbox, someone had once painted a name. The letters had faded now, worn down by rain and sun, until they were almost a whisper of what they used to be. But if you stood close, if you looked long enough, you could still make out the shape of them. A name, waiting for someone to come home. There are places in this world that people simply walk away from. And then there are places that somehow seem to keep waiting. This is a story about both. The rain came down hard that night, not the soft kind that taps gently on a window and lulls a tired soul to sleep. No, this was the kind that fell in sheets, the kind that turned roads into rivers and made the whole world feel as though it were being washed clean away. And inside a large building at the edge of a small town, a boy sat on the edge of a narrow bed and waited. His name was Caleb. He was 14 years old, and he had made up his mind. The room around him was quiet, except for the rain and the small sounds of other children settling in for the night. A cough down the hall, the creak of a bed frame, the soft murmur of a younger child talking in his sleep. Caleb knew these sounds well. He had listened to them for a long time now. He knew which beds creaked, and which children cried in the dark, and which had learned, like him, to do their crying without a sound. He knew the smell of the place, floor cleaner and old radiators, and something underneath it all that he could only ever think of as the smell of waiting. But tonight, he would not be here come morning. He pulled the thin blanket up to his chin, though he was already dressed underneath it. 2 shirts, his warmest hoodie, the one pair of jeans without holes in the knees. His heart was beating fast. He could feel it in his throat. In the corner of the room, a small backpack leaned against the wall, packed with everything he owned that mattered, which was not much. A few clothes, some food he had quietly saved, a little at a time so that no one would notice it was gone. A flashlight, a little money, earned doing small jobs around the building, and 1 photograph. The photograph hurt to look at, so he did not look at it. Not tonight. He simply lay there in the dark and counted the minutes. It had not always been like this. Once, there had been a small apartment with thin walls and a television that only worked if you hit the side of it just right. Once, there had been a woman with tired eyes who used to braid a much younger Caleb's hair before school, even though he squirmed and complained the whole time. She would hum while she did it. He could not, for the life of him, remember the tune anymore. Only that there had been one. Only that for a little while there had been a sound in the morning that belonged to the two of them. Once, there had been something that almost felt like a home. But homes can come apart, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. When Caleb was 11, a man came into his mother's life. A man with a loud voice and a short temper, who looked at the boy the way you might look at an old chair that did not match the rest of the room. And one day, a choice was made. His mother chose the man. And just like that, a boy who had a mother in the morning had no one by nightfall. He did not like to think about that day. The suitcase that had felt too light for everything it was supposed to hold. The way the latch had clicked shut. The door that had closed behind him with a sound so ordinary it almost seemed cruel. After that, there were other places, other rooms, other beds. He learned, as children in his situation learn, to keep his head down, to take up as little space as possible, to expect not very much. He had been moved more than once. Each time, the people changed, the walls changed, the rules changed. But the feeling stayed the same. The feeling of being a guest somewhere he did not belong. The feeling of waiting for a door to close again. This place, this large brick building full of children who had all lost something, was the latest of them. The people here were not unkind. They were simply overwhelmed. There were too many children and too few grown-ups, and so the days passed in a kind of gray sameness. Fed, clothed, sent to school, brought back. It was care of a sort, but it was not love. And somewhere deep inside the boy, a quiet voice had begun to whisper that if he stayed here much longer, he would forget how love even felt. That voice had grown louder lately, until on this rainy night, it had become loud enough to move him. He waited until the building had gone still, until the footsteps in the hallway had stopped, until the soft snore of the man on night duty drifted from the office near the front, until the only thing left awake in the whole world seemed to be the rain. Then, slowly, carefully, Caleb sat up. In the bed across from his, a much smaller boy slept curled around a worn, stuffed animal. He could not have been more than 7. His name was Theo, and he had only come to the building a few weeks before. And on his very first night, he had cried so hard that Caleb, who knew better than to grow attached to anyone, had crossed the dark room and sat on the edge of that little bed until the crying finally slowed. He had not meant to do it again, but he had. Most nights after that, Caleb looked at him now for a long moment. There was a part of him that wanted to wake the little one, to say goodbye, to say something, but he could not risk it. So instead, he leaned close, and he whispered, words too soft for anyone but a sleeping boy to hear. Something about being brave, something about how it would not always feel like this. He hoped, wherever he was going, that he would turn out to be right. Then he lifted his backpack, eased it onto his shoulders, and stepped toward the door. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet. To his ears, every creak sounded like a shout. He froze, listened, waited for a light to flick on, for a voice to call out, for the whole night to fall apart around him. But the rain kept falling, and no one came. He moved down the dim hallway, past the closed doors, past the quiet rooms. There was a side exit at the far end of the building, one that the boy had noticed did not always behave the way it should. He had watched it for weeks. He had timed his chances the way other boys his age timed nothing at all. He pressed his hand against the cold metal bar. He took a breath. And then he pushed. The door opened, silently, and the night swallowed him whole. The cold hit him at once. The rain soaked through his hoodie within minutes, plastering his hair to his forehead, running down the back of his neck in icy little rivers. He pulled his hood up and kept walking. Close to the building at first, then to the tree line that bordered the property. When he reached the trees, he stopped, and he looked back. The building sat there in the rain, large and dark, with 1 or 2 windows still glowing softly with light. For a single, trembling moment, part of him wanted to turn around, to run back inside, to crawl into that narrow bed and pretend he had stayed. It was warm in there. It was dry. There was a roof and a meal in the morning, and a kind of safety in being a small thing among many small things. But warmth without belonging, he had come to understand, is a colder thing than cold itself. So he did not turn back. He turned away, and he kept walking. He had no real plan, only a feeling, a pulling in his chest that said, "Move, keep moving, get as far away as you can before the morning comes." So he walked. The little town was a quiet place, a scattering of houses and shops surrounded by fields and forest, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and a stranger would be noticed at once. So the boy stayed off the main roads. He kept to the edges, to the shadows, to the back ways where no headlights would find him. The rain was both his enemy and his friend that night. It chilled him to the bone and made every step heavier than the last, but it also kept the world indoors. It emptied the streets. It hit him. Hours passed. The town fell behind him. The houses grew farther apart. The streetlights disappeared one by one until the only light left was the pale gray of the clouds and the occasional flash far off in the sky. His teeth were chattering now. His fingers had gone numb inside his sleeves. He could no longer feel his feet. Only a dull ache where they used to be. He knew, in the dim and distant way that the body knows such things, that he needed to get out of the cold. Soon. And that was when he saw it. At first, it was only a shape in the darkness, a darker shadow against the gray. But as he came closer, walking up that long dirt road with the rain in his eyes, the shape became a place, a farm, set back from the road, half hidden behind a tangle of overgrown trees and grass grown tall and wild. There stood a house, 2 stories, with a porch that wrapped around the front, and beside it, a little ways off, a large old barn. Even in the dark, even through the rain, the boy could tell that no one lived here. The house had a tired, hollow look, windows like empty eyes, a porch that sagged in the middle, as though it had grown weary of holding itself up. But the barn looked solid, and more than that, the barn looked dry. He crossed the overgrown yard, his shoes sinking into the wet earth with every step. The grass clutched at his legs. Somewhere, a loose board knocked softly in the wind, a slow and lonely sound, like a hand tapping at a door no one would answer. The barn door stood partly open. He slipped inside, and the rain, at last, was somewhere else. It was dark in the barn, and quiet. The air smelled of old hay and weathered wood, of dust and time and stillness. Caleb pulled the flashlight from his pack and clicked it on. A thin beam of light cut through the dark, sweeping across the space. Empty stalls, a rusted bit of machinery in the corner, a ladder leading up to a loft where a few old bales of hay still sat stacked against the wall. He climbed up. The ladder groaned beneath him, but it held. In the loft, he pulled some of the hay together into a rough, lumpy bed. It was old, musty, far from comfortable, but it was off the cold ground, and it was dry. He peeled off his soaked hoodie and wrung it out as best he could, then spread it over a beam, where some hopeful part of him imagined it might dry by morning. He curled up in the driest corner he could find, his backpack tucked beneath his head, his arms wrapped tight around his knees. His whole body was shaking. He was alone, soaked through, and farther from anything than he had ever been. But for the first time in a long while, no one knew where he was. No one was waiting to move him. No one was watching. No one was counting him as a number on a list. In the strange, exhausted quiet of that thought, the boy closed his eyes, and sleep, heavy and sudden, took him down. When he woke, the world had changed color. Pale morning light was slipping in through the gaps in the wooden walls, painting long golden stripes across the dusty floor of the loft. For a moment, the boy did not know where he was. Then it all came back. The rain, the walk, the barn. He sat up slowly. Every muscle in his body ached. His clothes were still damp, clinging to his skin, and his stomach had begun to growl. He climbed down the ladder, careful with each rung, and stepped to the barn door. And in the daylight, he saw the place for what it truly was. The farm stretched out before him, wide and silent. Fields that had once been planted, now grown over with weeds and wildflowers. A garden gone to ruin. A rusted old machine half swallowed by tall grass. A chicken coop collapsed in on one side. And the house. In the morning light, the house looked even more forlorn than it had in the dark. The paint had peeled away in long curling strips. Some of the windows were broken. The front steps had partly caved in. It had the look of a place no one had wanted in a very long time. And the boy, who knew a thing or two about not being wanted, felt something tighten in his chest. He stood there a while, just looking. The farm looked back. He spent that first day being careful. He stayed near the barn, venturing out only to look around, always listening for the sound of a car, a voice, a footstep. But none came. The farm was still, peaceful in a lonely sort of way. He found a small creek not far off, its water clear and cold, running quick over smooth stones. He found the collapsed garden, where a few stubborn green things still pushed up through the weeds, as though no one had told them they were supposed to have given up. He walked the edges of the property and saw no sign that anyone had been here in a very long time. By afternoon, his hunger had grown sharp. He sat in the doorway of the barn and ate slowly. A little of the food he had saved, just enough to quiet his stomach, no more. He did not know how long it would have to last. And as he ate, a heavy thought settled over him. What now? He had run, but he had not really thought past the running itself. Where does a 14-year-old boy go, with no family, no money to speak of, and no place in the world that would have him? If he went to another town, he would need papers he did not have. If he tried to find work, the same. The grown-up world had a way of asking questions a boy like him could not answer. He was free, but freedom, he was learning, could feel a great deal like being trapped. He pulled his knees to his chest and watched the light grow long across the fields, and for the first time since he had left, the loneliness came. Not the loneliness of a crowded room. He knew that kind well. This was a different, quieter loneliness. The loneliness of a wide-open place with no one in it. The loneliness of having gotten exactly what he wanted and finding it cold. That evening, the barn felt too empty. So the boy did something he probably should not have done. He walked up to the house. He told himself he was only looking for supplies. A blanket, maybe. Something useful. But the truth he could feel yet did not want to name, was simpler than that. He did not want to be alone. The back door was locked, but the wood around it had grown soft with age, and a firm push was enough to make it give way with a tired little crack. Inside, it was like stepping into a held breath. The house was a place that time had simply walked away from. There was still furniture in the rooms, draped in dust and cobwebs. There were still dishes in the kitchen cabinets, pots hanging from hooks above the stove. In the pantry, a few old cans sat in a row, their labels faded to nothing. It was as though the people who lived here had only stepped out for a moment, and then had somehow never come back. In the front room, above a cold stone fireplace, there were photographs. The boy lifted the flashlight to them. A man and a woman, no longer young, smiling in that soft way people smile when a camera catches them off guard. Children gathered around a table, a holiday perhaps, faces lit with candlelight, small hands reaching for something just out of frame, ordinary moments, frozen, kept. The boy stood before them a long while. A family had lived here once. He could feel them in the rooms, in the worn places on the stairs, in the curtains gone gray with dust, in the way the house seemed to lean, ever so slightly, toward the memory of voices it could no longer hear. He wondered what had happened to them. He wondered why a place so clearly loved had been allowed to fall apart. And though he would not have said it aloud, he wondered something else, too. He wondered if there was room in an empty house for an empty-handed boy. Upstairs he found 3 bedrooms. One had clearly belonged to a child. A boy, by the look of it. Small model airplanes still hung from the ceiling on thin threads, turning slowly in the draft from the broken window. Faded posters clung to the walls. On a shelf sat a row of little trophies, the kind they give children for trying, gone gray and dull with dust. Another was larger, a grown-up's room, with a wide bed and a quilt gone soft and pale with age. And the third was simple, plain, a single bed against the wall, a small room, the kind a house keeps for guests who might one day visit. The boy stood in the doorway of that little room a long time. He knew he should sleep in the barn. The barn was safer, easier to hide in if anyone ever came. But the bed was calling to him. He had not slept in a real bed in years, not since the time before everything came apart. There had been thin mattresses on metal frames. There had been couches and floors and rooms that were never his. But this, a real bed, in a real room, with a real quilt, was something he had nearly forgotten existed. He made a choice that night, a small choice, but it would turn out to be a very large one. He decided to stay, not forever. He was not foolish enough to think in terms of forever, but for a while. He would treat this quiet, sleeping place as though it were his. That night, he found old linens in a closet and shook the dust from them as best he could. He made up the little bed properly, smoothing the quilt with his hands. He found that the house still had water, though it ran rust-colored and cold from the tap at first. He let it run until it cleared, then washed his face and his hands, and the cold of it felt almost like being made new. There was no electricity, but in a drawer he found a few old candles and his flashlight for the rest. And when at last he lay down in that bed, in that small, quiet room, something inside him loosened. Just a little. He slept. And he did not dream of doors closing. In the days that followed, the boy fell into a kind of rhythm. He woke with the sun. He ate a little. And then he worked. He could not have said exactly why. He found an old broom and swept the floors of the kitchen and the little bedroom until the dust no longer rose in clouds with every step. He wiped down counters. He washed the old dishes in cold water and set them carefully back in their places. He pulled weeds from the ruined garden, his fingers raw, his back aching until a patch of dark earth showed through. He had never done work like this before. No one had taught him, but he found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he had a knack for it, that if he looked at a thing carefully enough, he could usually figure out how it was meant to go. A loose cabinet door. He tightened it. A wobbly chair. He steadied it. A shutter hanging by a single hinge. He set it right. Each small repair gave him a feeling he could not quite describe. A feeling he had been hungry for without ever knowing its name. The feeling of making something a little better than he found it. The feeling of mattering, even just to a house. And the strangest thing was this. The more he cared for the place, the more the place seemed to soften toward him. The barn, which had felt cold and full of shadows that first night, became something like a workshop, a spot where he laid out the few tools he found and planned what to do next. The house, which had felt hollow, began to feel less hollow, as though the rooms were grateful to be swept, as though the windows enjoyed being clean. It sounds foolish, perhaps, to speak of a house having feelings, but the boy had been alone a long time. And sometimes, when a person has no one left to talk to, they begin to talk to the walls. He told the photographs on the mantel about his day. He told the quiet kitchen what he planned to fix next. He stood on the sagging porch in the evening and told the wide and silent fields his small and private fears. It was not the same as a person, but it was something. And something, to a boy who had lived so long with nothing, was a great deal indeed. But a boy cannot live on stolen crackers and stubborn garden greens. By the 5th day, his little store of food had dwindled down to almost nothing. He turned the last of it over in his hands, and he knew the time had come to do the one thing he had been dreading. He would have to go into town. He set out early, with his hood up and his head down, and the few crumpled bills from his pack folded tight in his fist. The road felt longer than it was. Every car that passed made his heart climb into his throat. He kept waiting for one of them to slow, to stop, for a window to roll down, and a voice to ask him where he thought he was going. But none did. He reached the little grocery at the edge of town and slipped inside, and the warmth and the light and the ordinary hum of the place nearly undid him. He bought what he could: bread, a jar of peanut butter, a few apples, a jug of water. He counted his coins twice at the counter, his face hot, sure that everyone could see exactly what he was. But the tired woman at the register barely glanced at him. To her, he was just a boy buying bread. And there was a strange comfort in that, in being, for one short moment, nobody worth a second look. It was on the way out of town that he saw it. A board outside the little post office, the kind of board where small towns pin up their notices. Lost dogs, yard sales, a choir looking for singers. And there, among all the ordinary scraps of small-town life, was his own face. The boy stopped. The world seemed to go very quiet. It was a school photograph, the kind he had always hated, where he looked younger than he was and his hair would not lie flat. Above it, in plain black letters, was a single word, missing, and below it, his name, the name they had for him, the one written on his file in offices he had never seen, by people who had never once asked him what he wanted to be called. He stared at it a long time. That boy in the photograph. That was him. But it also was not. The boy in that photograph still half believed that someone, somewhere, might want him, that a family might choose him, that a door might open. The boy standing on the cold sidewalk knew better now. Slowly, he reached up. He took the notice down. He folded it small and smaller, and pushed it deep into his pocket. And he walked back the long road to the farm, to the only place in the world that had not asked him to be anything other than what he was. The days slipped by and turned into weeks, and somehow, against all sense, the boy was still there. The notices around town disappeared, replaced by newer ones about newer things. The cars stopped feeling like a threat. The world, it seemed, had a great many lost children to keep track of and had quietly moved its attention along to the next of them. He had learned the rhythm of staying hidden. He made his trips to town few and far between, and brief when he made them. He boiled water from the creek over a small fire in the yard, always at night, when the smoke would not be seen. He rationed. He planned. He grew in his careful and solitary way, almost good at being a secret. And he kept working, because the work was the thing that held the loneliness at bay. And slowly, the farm began to look less like a place that had been abandoned, and more like a place where someone, at last, had chosen to stay. It was on one of those quiet mornings that he noticed the mailbox. It stood at the very end of the long dirt road, where the property met the wider world. A small, rusted thing on a leaning post, half hidden by the tall grass. He had walked past it a dozen times without really looking. But this morning, for some reason, he stopped. He brushed the grass aside, and he opened it. Inside, there was a letter. Not an old letter, not yellowed and faded like the things inside the house. A new one, crisp at the corners, the ink still dark. The boy stared at it a long moment. His breath caught somewhere in his chest, because a new letter meant something he had not let himself consider. It meant that someone, somewhere, still thought of this place. It meant that the farm was not as alone in the world as it seemed. Someone was still paying it mind. Someone was still sending something down this long and lonely road, to a house everyone else believed was empty. The boy looked back over his shoulder at the farm, at the swept porch, the cleared garden, the work of his own two hands. And a cold thought crept in beside the warm one. If someone still cared about this place, then someone, one day, might come. He closed the mailbox slowly, and the morning, which had felt so peaceful only moments before, felt suddenly very thin. He should have left then. A wiser boy, a more frightened boy, might have packed his bag and slipped away while the leaving was still easy. But he did not. Because the truth was, he had nowhere else to go. And more than that, a far more dangerous thing had begun to happen inside him. He had begun to hope. He had begun to think of the little bedroom as his room, of the swept kitchen as his kitchen, of the long, quiet days, hard as they were, as a kind of life he could almost imagine living. He did not want to give it up. Not yet. So he stayed. And he kept working. And he tried, as the young so often do, to push the cold thought down beneath the warm one, to tell himself the letter meant nothing, that whoever sent it would not come, that this place could go on being his small secret a little longer. For a few more days, it worked. The sun rose. He swept. He fixed. He pulled weeds and carried water and talked to the photographs on the mantel, and the farm, slowly, began to look less like a place that had been abandoned, and more like a place where someone, at last, had chosen to stay. It was a handful of days later that he found the sign. He had wandered to the far edge of the property, near where the dirt road met the wider lane, looking for fallen branches he might use to mend the garden fence. And there, half swallowed by the tall grass, leaning against the leaning post, was a sign. It had not been there before, or perhaps it had, hidden in the weeds, and he simply had not seen it. He pushed the grass aside with his foot, and he read it. The words were plain, printed in dark, official letters on a weathered whiteboard, and the boy read them once, then again, and then a third time, as though reading them enough might somehow change what they said. The farm was to be cleared, the house, the barn, the fields, all of it, before the season turned. The boy stood very still. The morning birds went on singing as though nothing had happened. The breeze moved gently through the long grass, soft and indifferent. Behind him, on the porch he had swept with his own hands, the house sat quiet in the sun, waiting, as it had been waiting, perhaps, for a very long time. Not long now. A handful of weeks, no more. He looked down at the sign, then back up at the house, the one place in all the wide world that had felt even a little like home. And in the silence of that bright, ordinary morning, a clock began to tick. A clock the boy could not see, but one he could already feel, counting down. The days that followed were not the same. Before the sign, the boy had worked with a quiet kind of peace, a slow, easy rhythm, as though there were all the time in the world. Now there was a clock. He could not see it. He could not hear it. But he could feel it, ticking somewhere just beneath his ribs, every hour of every day. He did not fully understand what the words on that sign would mean. He was only 14 after all, and the ways of the grown-up world were still a fog to him. But he understood enough. He understood that someone, somewhere, had decided this place should be gone. The house he had swept, the barn he had made into a workshop, the garden he had pulled back, weed by weed, from the wild, all of it. Erased. And the strange thing, The thing he could not explain even to the photographs on the mantel was how much it hurt. It was not his farm. He knew that. It had never been his. But somehow, in the short while he had been here, it had become the closest thing to his that he had ever known. He worked harder after that, as though, by caring for the place more, he could somehow keep it. As though a clean kitchen and a mended fence and a swept porch might be enough to make the world change its mind. It was a foolish hope. He half knew that even then. But hope, when a person has been without it a long time, has a way of clinging on past all good sense. So he scrubbed, he fixed, he carried water from the creek and pulled the last of the dead things from the garden. And he told himself it mattered, even if no one would ever see it. Even if it would all be gone before the cold set in for good. It was the chill that drove him up into the attic. The nights had begun to bite. The mild days of his arrival had given way to something sharper, a cold that crept in through the broken windows after dark and settled into the boy's bones. His single hoodie was no match for it. He slept under all the old blankets he could find, piled one atop another. But on the worst nights, he could see his own breath rising pale in the dark of the little room. He needed warmer clothes. And so, on a gray afternoon, he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. He had been avoiding it. The pull-down ladder looked unsteady, and there was something about attics, about the still and dusty dark of them, that made even a brave boy hesitate. But the cold won out over the fear. He went up. The attic was a low and narrow space, cramped beneath the slope of the roof. Dust hung in the thin shafts of light that came through the cracks. Old boxes sat stacked in the corners. A broken chair. A rolled-up rug. The leftover odds and ends of lives long finished. And there, against the far wall, sat a trunk. A large wooden trunk with corners of dull brass and a lid gone soft with age. The boy made his way toward it, ducking beneath the beams, his footsteps stirring up little clouds of dust that danced in the light. He knelt before it. He lifted the lid, and the trunk opened with a long, low groan, like something waking from a very deep sleep. Inside, there was warmth. Folded neatly, layer upon layer, were clothes, heavy wool sweaters, thick socks, soft worn things made for cold winters long ago, and at the very top, a coat, far too large for the boy, made for a grown man's shoulders, but warm, wonderfully, gloriously warm. The clothes smelled of age and cedar and something faintly sweet, but they were clean and whole. The boy gathered them into his arms, his cold fingers grateful, and for a moment he simply held them. The warmth of someone else's care, kept safe in a box all these years, now wrapping itself around a boy who had nearly forgotten what care felt like. And then, as he lifted the last sweater from the trunk, he found something else beneath the clothes. A bundle of letters, tied together with a ribbon, faded now to a pale and ghostly color, but carefully knotted, the way you tie something you mean to keep. The boy sat back on the dusty floor, and slowly he untied the ribbon. He should not have read them. He knew that. They were not his to read. But the house had been so silent for so long. And these were the words of the people who had lived in it. The man and the woman from the photographs on the mantel. The voices that had once filled these rooms. The boy was lonely. And lonely people are drawn to the voices of others, even the voices of strangers. even the voices of strangers long gone. So he read, and slowly, page by page, the people of the house came alive. There had been a woman. Her name, the boy gathered from the letters, was Eleanor. And there had been a man, her husband, with a gentle, joking way about him that came through even in faded ink. They had built this farm together, worked it together, coaxed things up out of the dark earth, and raised a family beneath this very roof. The letters told their story in pieces. A line here about a hard winter, a line there about a good harvest. Small worries, small joys. The ordinary stuff of an ordinary, well-lived life. But there was something more in those pages, too. Something the boy had not expected. There was a sadness running underneath the words, quiet, but always there, like a low note beneath a song. A theme that came back again and again, promises to visit that somehow never quite happened, plans that fell away, the slow, sad drift of people who loved one another, but lived too far apart and too busy to ever quite close the distance. The boy read about a family that had loved each other and had still, somehow, come apart. It was a kind of coming apart he had never imagined. Not the sudden, slamming door kind he knew, but a slower, gentler kind, a drifting, a fading, and it made his chest ache in a way he did not fully understand. It was in the last letter that he found it, the thing that changed everything. The letters near the bottom of the bundle were the oldest and the saddest. And as the boy worked his way through them, the story they told grew quieter and heavier. There had been a child. Eleanor and her husband had loved this child the way the photographs on the mantel showed they loved them all, with holidays and birthdays and small hands reaching across a crowded table. But somewhere along the way, that child had been lost to them. Not in the way the boy first feared. The letters did not speak of that. It was something gentler, and in its own way, sadder. A growing apart. A silence that had stretched on too long. A door that had closed not with a slam, but with a sigh, and had simply stayed shut. A child who had gone away, and had not come back. The boy read the words slowly, again and again, sitting there on the dusty attic floor in the fading afternoon light. And as he read, a strange and powerful feeling came over him, because he understood. He understood the silence Eleanor wrote about. He understood the waiting. He understood what it was to love a place, a person, a feeling, and to lose it not all at once, but slowly, in 1,000 small goodbyes. This woman, this Eleanor, she had known this ache too, in her own quiet way, through her own quiet grief. The boy set the letters down, and he looked around the attic, at the dust in the boxes, and the soft gray light. And then he understood something larger. This house was not simply empty. This house was lonely. It had loved a family, and the family had gone. It had held birthdays and harvests and laughter, and one by one the voices had faded. It had waited, year after year, for someone to come back, and no one had. The house carried the same ache the boy carried. Two lonely things, the house and the boy, had found each other at the end of a long dirt road. And for the first time, sitting there in the dusty dark, the boy did not feel quite so alone, because he was not the only one who had been left waiting. The house had been waiting too. And somehow, that made them family, he cried then, quietly. the way a boy cries when he has held it in for a very long time. He cried for Eleanor, who had loved this place and lost the people in it. He cried for the child who had gone away and for whatever sorrow had carried them off. And he cried, at last, for himself, for the mother who had chosen someone else, for all the rooms that had never been his, for the long road that had led him to a sleeping farm at the end of the world. And when the crying was done, something had shifted. The boy wiped his face with the sleeve of his new old sweater. And he made a promise, not out loud. There was no one to hear it. But he made it all the same. If this place was going to be taken, if the clock was going to run out, then he would not let it go quietly. He would care for it until the very last day. He would not let it slip away unseen, not while he was still here. He came down from the attic with the warm clothes in his arms and a new fire in his chest. The days grew shorter. The clock ticked on. But the boy worked with a purpose he had not known before. He was no longer just hiding. He was no longer just surviving. He was tending something, honoring something, keeping a promise to a woman he had never met. He fixed the broken latch on the garden gate. He cleared the last of the dead vines and turned the cold earth, though he did not yet know what he meant to plant. He swept the porch each morning and watched the sun come up over the wild fields. And in the evenings, when the loneliness came creeping back, as it always did, he would take out the letters, and he would read a little more. And it helped. It helped to know that someone, even a stranger, even someone long gone, had once felt the way he felt now. It helped to know he was not the first. And then, one afternoon, the world found him. It came as the sound of an engine. The boy was in the barn, his hands busy with a stubborn shelf that had come loose from the wall, when he heard it. A vehicle, coming up the long dirt road. His heart stopped, then started again, fast and hard. This was it. This was the thing he had feared since the day he found the letter in the mailbox. Someone was coming. Someone had remembered. Someone had finally come down the long road to the sleeping farm. And they would find a boy who had no right to be here. He dropped the tool. He scrambled up the ladder into the loft, fast and clumsy, his breath loud in his ears. He pressed himself into the shadows and peered out through a gap between the boards. A truck rolled to a stop in the overgrown yard, old but well kept, the kind of truck that had been cared for over many years. The door opened, and a man climbed out. He was old, tall, and broad through the shoulders, though the years had begun to bend him. He wore the simple clothes of a man used to working with his hands, and a heavy jacket against the cold. He stood a moment beside the truck, just looking at the house. And there was something in the way he looked at it. Not the look a stranger gives a building. Not curiosity. Not surprise. It was the look you give an old friend you have not seen in far too long. It was almost tender. The boy held his breath. The old man began to walk, slowly, toward the house. His boots crunched on the gravel, then went soft in the long grass. And as he walked, he spoke, quietly, almost to himself. The boy could not catch every word, only pieces, carried on the cold air. Something about coming by, like he had promised. Something about checking on the place, and a name, the name of the woman from the letters. The boy's heart turned over in his chest. This old man knew Eleanor. He had known her. He had promised her something. He had come, after all this time, to keep that promise. The old man stopped walking. He had noticed something. The boy watched through the gap in the boards as the man's expression slowly changed. As his eyes moved across the swept porch, the cleared garden, the barn door propped open, with tools laid out in neat and careful rows, the tenderness gave way to something else. Confusion. The old man turned a slow circle, taking it all in, and the boy could almost see the thoughts moving behind those weathered features. This is not how a sleeping place should look. Someone has been here. Someone is here. The old man walked to the back of the house. He saw the door, the one the boy had pushed open that first night, the frame still split from where it had given way, and his confusion deepened into something graver. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small phone, and the boy, watching from the dark of the loft, knew he had only seconds. He could stay hidden. He could press himself into the shadows and pray and let the old man make his call. And perhaps the man would leave. And perhaps people would come. And perhaps, in the end, the boy would be found anyway, dragged out of the loft like a frightened animal. Or he could show himself. He could step out into the light and face whatever came next on his own 2 feet. Neither was a good choice, but one of them, at least, was his. Before the fear could talk him out of it, the boy moved. He climbed down the ladder. His legs were shaking. His hands were cold. He crossed the dim floor of the barn and stepped out into the gray afternoon light. Please. His voice came out smaller than he meant it to. The old man spun around, startled, the phone half raised in his hand, and the two of them stood there. Across the overgrown yard, a weathered old man and a thin, frightened boy, looking at each other. Please don't call anyone, the boy said. I'll go. I'll leave right now. I need a few minutes to get my things. The old man did not move. He did not speak. He simply studied the boy with a pair of pale, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The damp clothes, the thin frame, the fear written plain across a young face that had forgotten how to hide it. The boy braced himself for the phone call, for the anger, for the words grown-ups always seemed to have ready for boys like him. But the old man only lowered the phone, slowly, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not what the boy expected. It was gentle. How long have you been here, son? The kindness in it nearly undid the boy completely. He had not been called son in a very long time. A while, the boy managed. A few weeks, maybe. But I didn't break anything. I swear. I've been taking care of it. Cleaning, fixing things. I just needed somewhere to stay. The old man was quiet a long moment. His eyes moved again across the swept yard, the mended fence, the cleared garden. And the boy saw something cross the old man's face. Understanding, perhaps. Or memory. You did all this, the old man said. It was not quite a question. The boy nodded. The old man let out a long, slow breath. I knew the woman who lived here, he said quietly, looking past the boy toward the house. And her husband. Good people. I made a promise a long time ago to look in on this place, to keep an eye on it. He shook his head. Seems I haven't been doing a very good job. You've been here weeks, and I never knew. The boy did not know what to say. So he said the truest thing he had. "I'm sorry. I didn't have anywhere else to go." The old man looked at him for a long, long moment, and whatever he saw in that thin, frightened, hopeful face, it seemed to settle something inside him. "Come on," he said at last. The boy tensed, but the old man only gestured gently toward the truck. "Let's get you somewhere warm," he said. "You can tell me your story, and then we'll figure out what comes next." The cab of the truck was warm. The old man had the heater going, and after weeks of cold barns and colder nights, the warmth wrapped around the boy like something almost holy. He had forgotten what it was to be truly warm. The old man did not push him. He simply waited, his hands resting on the wheel, his eyes on the gray fields beyond the windshield. And after a while, the boy began to talk. It came slowly at first, then faster, then all at once, like water through a broken dam. He told the old man about the mother who had chosen someone else, about the long string of rooms that had never been his, about the gray sameness of the big brick building full of lost children, about the night he had finally walked out into the rain because he could no longer bear to disappear. He told him about the farm, about the barn and the bed, and the slow, strange comfort of caring for a place no one wanted. And he told him about the letters, about Eleanor, about the family that had drifted apart, about the child who had gone away and never returned. "She was lonely," the boy said softly. "I could tell, reading her letters. She was lonely, just like this house, just like—" He stopped, but the old man finished it gently, in the quiet of the warm cab. "Just like you." The boy did not answer. He did not have to. The old man was silent a long while after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Eleanor," he said, "was one of the finest people a person could ever hope to know. She and her husband both. They loved this farm, more than just about anything." He paused. It broke their hearts, the way things ended up, the way the years pulled everyone apart. He looked out at the house, the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the work of a lonely boy's hands. "And now it just sits here," he said, slowly falling down, waiting for someone to decide what becomes of it. The boy swallowed. "Someone did decide," he said quietly. "There's a sign by the road. It says they're going to clear it, the whole place, before the season turns." The old man went very still. Something flickered across his weathered face, surprise, and beneath it, a deep and weary sorrow. "Is that so?" he murmured, and he said nothing more about it. "Not yet." "I know I have to go back," the boy said into the silence. "I know this isn't my place. I know I can't stay." His voice cracked. I haven't had a home in a long time, and this was the closest thing. I'm sorry. I'll go wherever you take me. Just, please don't be angry." The old man turned and looked at him, really looked at him, and the boy saw, to his astonishment, that the old man's eyes had gone bright and wet. "Son," the old man said slowly, "I'm not angry." He shook his head. "I'm just trying to understand how a boy ends up taking better care of a place than the people who were supposed to." He was quiet a moment. Then he made a decision. The boy could see it happen, see it settle into the old man's shoulders. "Here's what we're going to do," the old man said. "You're not going back out into the cold tonight. And you're not climbing into the back of some stranger's car. Not while I've got a say in it." The boy stared at him. "There's someone I want you to meet," the old man went on. "My wife. We've got a warm house and a spare room, and more food than two old folks know what to do with." A faint, tired smile touched his face. "And I have a feeling she's going to want to feed you the moment she sees how thin you are." The boy could not speak. "Just for tonight," the old man said gently. "We'll sort out the rest tomorrow. But tonight, you'll sleep somewhere warm, with a roof that doesn't leak. All right?" The boy's throat was too tight for words, so he only nodded. And the old man put the truck in gear, and they rolled slowly down the long dirt road, past the leaning mailbox with its faded name, away from the farm and the clock and the cold. The old man's house was a modest place, small and tidy, with a yard that had plainly been tended by someone who loved it. Warm light glowed in the windows, and as the truck pulled into the drive, the front door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was older, small, with soft gray hair and a face lined gently by years of weather and laughter. She wore an apron, and she wiped her hands on it as she peered out at the truck, trying to make sense of the second figure beside her husband. The old man got out. He went to her. He said something low, just for her, and the boy watched through the windshield as her expression changed from confusion to understanding to something soft and warm and aching all at once. She came down the porch steps, slowly, and she opened the truck door herself, and she looked at the boy sitting there in his oversized borrowed coat, with his thin frame and his frightened eyes. And she did not ask him a single hard question. She did not look at him the way the world so often had, as a problem, as a case, as a number on a list. She looked at him as Eleanor must have once looked at the children gathered round her crowded table. "Oh, sweetheart," the woman said softly, "you must be freezing half to death." She held out her hand. "Come on inside now. There's stew on the stove, and bread just out of the oven. Let's get something warm in you." The boy looked at her hand, and then at her face, and something he had been holding tight for 3 long years began very quietly to come loose. The kitchen was warm and golden and full of good smells. The woman set a bowl in front of him, and then another. She cut thick slices of bread and pushed the butter toward him without being asked. She moved around him with an easy, gentle care, the kind that comes naturally to a person for whom looking after others is simply who they are. The old man sat across the table, his big hands wrapped around a mug, watching the boy eat with a quiet satisfaction. And the boy ate. He ate the way a person eats when they have been hungry for a very long time. Not just for food, for this, for a warm kitchen, for a table, for the sound of 2 old voices talking softly over the top of his head about ordinary things, as though he had always been here. As though there were nothing strange at all about a lost boy at their table on a cold, gray evening. They did not interrogate him. They did not make him feel like a guest who might be asked to leave. They simply let him be there. And somewhere in the middle of that second bowl of stew, the boy realized something that made his eyes sting and his chest go tight. For the first time in 3 years, he was sitting at a table where someone had waited for him, where someone had set a place, where someone was glad he had come. He kept his head down over the bowl so they would not see his face. But the woman saw anyway. Of course she did. She did not say anything. She only rested her hand, for the briefest moment, on the top of his head, as you might touch something precious. And then she went back to the stove and ladled out a little more, and told him there was plenty, and that he should eat his fill. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows. Somewhere down a long dirt road, a sleeping farm sat waiting in the dark, with a clock still ticking and a sign still standing in the tall grass. But here, in this small and golden kitchen, a boy the world had let slip through its hands had, at last, been gathered in. And though he did not know it yet, though none of them knew it yet, his story was only just beginning to turn. Pun hai train hai, the first light of morning found the boy already awake. He lay in a real bed, in a small warm room, beneath a quilt that smelled of soap and cedar. And for a moment he did not move. He was afraid that if he moved, it might all turn out to be a dream. But the quilt was real. The warmth was real. And down the hall, the soft murmur of two old voices and the smell of something cooking told him that the kitchen and the kindness were real too. The boy let out a slow breath. And then, very quietly, he remembered the clock, the farm, the sign in the tall grass, the handful of weeks slipping away. He sat up. There was no time to waste. Over breakfast, the old man laid it out plainly. "That sign by the road," he said, setting down his coffee. "I made some calls last night, after you went to sleep." The boy's heart climbed into his throat. "The place belongs to family now," the old man went on. "Eleanor's kin, a woman who lives a long way off. She inherited it years back, and she's been meaning to do something with it ever since." He shook his head slowly. "But life gets in the way, and a far-off farm that's falling apart. It slips to the bottom of the pile. So she's the one selling it," the boy said. The old man nodded. "There's a man who wants the land, wants it cleared, the house, the barn, all of it gone. And from what I gather, she's just about ready to let him have it." The boy stared down at his plate. "How long?" he asked quietly. The old man and his wife exchanged a look across the table. "Not long," the old woman said gently. The boy was silent a moment. Then he lifted his head, and there was something new in his eyes, something that had not been there the night before, when he was only a cold and frightened thing in the front of a truck. "Then we have to fix it," he said, "before they come. We have to make it worth keeping." The old man studied him. "Son," he said slowly, "a place like that, it'd take a lot of work to bring back. More than 2 old folks and a boy could manage in the time we've got." "Then we'd better start now," the boy said, and something in the way he said it, something in the set of his small shoulders, made the old man set down his coffee and smile. "All right," the old man said. "All right then, we'll start now." And so it began, the race. Each morning, the old man would drive the boy out along the country road, past the leaning mailbox with its faded name, up to the farm waiting silent in the cold. And each morning they would work. The old man knew things the boy had never been taught. How to hold a tool so it became part of your hand instead of fighting it. How to read the bones of a building, to press a thumb to a beam and know whether it was sound or rotten through. How to look at a broken thing and see, beneath the ruin, the shape it was meant to be. He showed the boy how to measure twice and cut once, how to coax a stubborn board back into place without splitting it, how to drive a nail straight and clean in 3 sure strokes instead of a dozen frantic ones. The boy soaked it up like dry earth soaking up rain. He had always had a knack for figuring things out on his own in the quiet, but now, for the first time, he had someone working at his shoulder, someone who would lean back and tilt his head at a finished repair and say, "Now that's good work, son." Just that. And it would warm the boy clear through, better than any fire. And that changed everything. They mended the porch steps that had caved in, hauling up fresh boards and setting them true. They replaced the rotted frame by the back door, the one the boy had pushed through on his first cold night, so that it shut now with a solid, satisfying sound. They patched the holes in the barn roof, the old man steadying the ladder while the boy climbed up with hammer and nails, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, the wind cold on his ears. And piece by piece, the farm began to wake. It was slow. It was hard. The boy's hands grew blistered. Then the blisters broke. Then they healed over into calluses, and he looked at those calluses sometimes with a strange and private pride. His back ached at the end of each day in a way that somehow felt good. The ache of having done something. The ache of having mattered. There were setbacks. A whole afternoon lost to a frozen pump. A ladder that slipped, and a bad moment where the boy's heart stopped before the old man caught himself on the rail. A cold snap that drove them indoors for 2 days, where they sat by the fire, and the old man taught the boy to splice a rope and to whittle a peg, just to keep their hands busy. But the work went on, and the farm, foot by foot, came back toward the living. And the old woman came too, some days, with baskets of food. She would set the boy and her husband at the table on the mended porch and feed them until they could not eat another bite. And then she would tie back her gray hair and pull on a pair of gloves and join right in. She had a gift for the garden. Under her hands, the cold, dark earth the boy had cleared began to look less like ruin and more like possibility. "Come spring," she said one afternoon, patting the soil down over a handful of stubborn bulbs. This could grow just about anything. And the boy, kneeling beside her in the dirt, did not have the heart to say what they both knew, that come spring, there might be nothing here at all. In the evenings, they went back to the warm house, and slowly, without anyone quite deciding it out loud, the boy's place there became settled. His chair at the table, the one on the end by the window, his towel on the hook, the blue one, his small things arranged carefully on the dresser in the little room. The old woman never moved them. She understood, somehow, without being told, that a boy who had owned so little needed his few things to stay exactly where he put them. She taught him to cook, too. Simple things. How to crack an egg one-handed. How to knead bread until it stopped being a sticky mess and turned smooth and willing under his palms. She did not do it to keep him busy. "Everyone who lives here has a part to play," she told him, her flour-dusted hands guiding his over the dough. "That's what makes a place a home, instead of just a roof over your head." And the boy, who had been a guest in so many houses, who had learned to take up as little space as possible, began, for the first time, to feel like something more than a visitor. He did not say it. He hardly dared to think it. But in the quiet of the little room at night, with the warmth wrapped around him and the soft sound of two old voices down the hall, he let himself hope. There was even, once, talk of school. The old woman raised it gently over supper, that come the new term, perhaps, a boy his age ought to be among other young people, learning his letters and numbers properly again. The boy had gone very still at the thought of it, of walking into a room full of strangers who would know, the way small towns always know, exactly who he was, the runaway, the boy from the brick building. But the old man had only said, easy as anything, "Hold your head up. You made a hard choice in a hard spot, and you came out the other side of it stronger. That takes more spine than most grown men have got. Anybody can't see that isn't worth the worry." And the boy had turned the words over in his mind for a long time after, and found, to his surprise, that they made the thought of school a little less like a cliff edge, and a little more like a door he might one day be brave enough to walk through. But hope, the boy was learning, is a fragile thing. It was on a gray afternoon, in the middle of all that careful work, that the first shadow fell. The boy was up on the barn roof, securing the last of the patched shingles, when he noticed the car. It had slowed on the road below. A long, dark car, the kind that did not belong on a country lane. It crept past the leaning mailbox, past the end of the dirt drive, and then it stopped. A man got out. The boy went still on the roof, watching. The man did not come up to the house. He simply stood by his car, at the edge of the property, and he looked. But it was the way he looked that made the boy's stomach turn cold. He did not look at the farm the way the old man looked at it, with memory and tenderness and care. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he intends to be rid of. His eyes moved across the house, the barn, the cleared fields, measuring, calculating. Already seeing, the boy somehow understood, not what was there, but what could be put there instead. Once all of this was gone, the man lifted a small device and held it up, this way and that, the way a person takes the measure of a thing on paper before they have ever set foot on it. And then his gaze swept up to the roof, and for a long, cold moment, his eyes met the boy's. The man did not smile. He did not nod. He simply looked at the boy the way he had looked at the house, as something already counted, already gone. Then he turned and got back in his long, dark car and drove slowly away. But the boy stayed up on that roof a long time after the car had gone, the cold wind tugging at his clothes, a heavy knowing settling over him. That man wanted this place gone. And the boy, with his blistered hands and his patched shingles and his fragile, foolish hope, was the only thing standing in his way. He told the old man about the car that evening. The old man's face grew grave. "That'd be the buyer," he said quietly. "The one who wants the land." "He looked at it like it was already his," the boy said. The old man was silent a while, turning his coffee mug slowly in his big hands. "Men like that," he said at last, "they don't see a home when they look at a place. They don't see the people who lived there, or the lives that were spent there, or the hands that built it. They just see what they can make of the dirt, what it's worth, scraped clean and started over." He laid a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. "But we see different, don't we, son?" The boy nodded, and the next morning they worked harder than ever. The days fell away, one by one. And just when the boy had let himself believe that work and hope and sheer stubbornness might be enough, the second shadow fell. And this one struck far closer to the bone. It was the old woman who told him. She did it gently. She sat him down in the warm kitchen, and she took his hands in hers, and she looked at him with a softness that told him, even before she spoke, that the news was hard. "Sweetheart," she said, "someone's come looking for you." The boy went still. "Who?" he asked, but somewhere deep down, he already knew. "Your mother," the old woman said softly. The world seemed to tilt. The boy pulled his hands back, not unkindly. He simply could no longer feel them. His mother. The woman who had let the door close behind him on an ordinary afternoon. The woman who had chosen someone else. The woman whose face he kept folded in an old photograph at the bottom of his pack because looking at it hurt too much. And because not having it would have hurt worse. She had come looking for him, after all this time, for one wild, foolish moment. His heart leapt, because that is the cruel thing about a child's love for the parent who let them go. It does not switch off. It does not learn its lesson. It simply waits, quiet and patient and hopeful, for the day the door might open again. And in that first moment, the boy thought, maybe she came back for me. Maybe she's sorry. Maybe she missed me. Maybe all this time she's been lying awake the way I have, thinking of what we lost. Maybe. But then he saw the old woman's face, and the hope curdled into something colder. "Why?" the boy said slowly. "Why now?" The old woman hesitated, and in that hesitation, the boy understood. She had not come back out of love. She had not come back because she missed him, or was sorry, or had spent 3 years aching for the son she let go. She had come back because something had changed. Because there was something to be gained now. Because a boy who had been a burden to her once had somehow, somewhere along the way, become useful. The boy did not know all the particulars. He was only 14, after all, but he knew the shape of it. He knew, the way a child always knows, the difference between being wanted and being wanted for. And the difference broke something in him he had thought was already broken past breaking. "She wants to take me back," the boy said. It was not a question. The old woman's eyes shone. "There's talk of it," she said gently. "She says she wants to make things right, to have you home again." "It was never home," the boy said. His voice was very quiet and very sure. The old woman did not argue. She only held his hands tighter. "Whatever happens," she said, "you should know something. You're not alone in this. Not anymore." She glanced toward the doorway, where the old man stood, his weathered face dark with worry. "Whatever you decide, whatever comes, we are right here. Both of us. You hear?" But the boy barely heard her, because a terrible fear had taken hold of him. He had run from a gray building full of lost children and found a sleeping farm and a warm kitchen and 2 old people who looked at him as though he were worth looking at. He had found the closest thing to a home he had ever known. And now it could all be taken away. Not by the man in the long dark car, but by the one person whose claim on him no one could easily argue with. The boy stood up from the table, and without a word, He walked out into the cold. He went to the farm. Of course he did. Where else would he go? The old man drove him out without a word, understanding, the way he always seemed to understand, that there are times when a person needs to be in a particular place more than they need anything else in the world. And the boy walked through the quiet rooms of the house he had brought back from ruin, the swept floors, the mended door, the clean windows, the little room where he had slept those first cold nights, his own breath rising pale in the dark. This place had once been left to fade, the way he had once been left to fade. And together, the two of them, the boy and the house, had been slowly coming back to life. But now the world wanted to take it from him. All of it. The farm, the kitchen, the two old voices down the hall. The first real hope he had let himself feel in 3 long years. The boy sank down onto the floor of the front room, beneath the photographs on the mantel, and he put his face in his calloused hands. And for a long while, he simply could not see a way through. It was the trunk that saved him. Or rather, it was Eleanor. The boy did not plan it. He was not thinking clearly enough to plan anything. He simply found himself climbing the narrow attic stairs once more, in the gray light of that hard afternoon, drawn back to the only voice that had ever seemed to understand. He lifted the lid of the trunk. He took out the bundle of letters, tied with the faded ribbon, and he read them again. All of them, sitting there in the dust, with the cold light slanting through the cracks. And it was then, on his second careful reading, that he found it. A letter he had skimmed past before, tucked deep at the very bottom of the bundle, beneath all the others. The last one Eleanor had ever written. And it was not addressed to family at all. It was addressed to no one. And to anyone. It was the kind of letter a person writes when their heart is full and there is no one left to hear it. A letter to the empty air. A letter to the future. A letter to whoever might one day come. The boy read it slowly, and as he read, the breath caught in his chest. Because Eleanor had written about the farm, about the house she had loved with her whole life, about the long, quiet ache of watching it grow silent, room by room, as the people she loved drifted away one by one. And she had written a wish, a simple, aching wish. She had written that she hoped, more than anything in the world, that the house would not end its days alone. That someday, somehow, it might fill again with life and noise and the sound of feet on the stairs. That its doors might open to someone who needed a place to belong. The way she had once needed it. A child, perhaps. A child with nowhere else to go. That her home might one day be a home for someone who had none. The boy read the words again, and again, and the tears came, fast and silent, falling onto the faded page. Because Eleanor had not been writing to family. She had been writing to him. Across all the long and lonely years, she had been waiting for him. The boy did not know how long he sat there. But when he finally rose, the letter folded carefully against his chest. Something in him had changed. The fear was still there. But beneath it now was something stronger. A certainty. He had spent his whole young life letting things be decided for him, letting himself be moved and sorted and shuffled from room to room. Letting the grown-up world close its doors and open them again with no say from the boy on the other side. He had been quiet. He had kept his head down. He had taken up as little space as possible, but not this time. This time, he would speak. The woman who had inherited the farm came a few days later. Her name was Claire. She was younger than the old man and his wife, but the years sat heavily on her all the same. She arrived in a travel-worn car, and she stepped out into the cold and looked at the house with a face full of complicated things: guilt, weariness, and a deep, old sadness she seemed to have been carrying a very long way. The old man met her in the yard. The old woman, too. And the boy. For a long moment, Claire simply looked at the farm, at the mended porch, the clean windows, the straightened fence, the cleared garden where green things had begun, against all odds, to push up through the cold, dark earth. "I expected a ruin," she said quietly. "I'd made my peace with letting it go. It was easier to let go of a ruin. You don't have to grieve a thing that's already gone." Her eyes moved to the boy. "They tell me you're the one who did all this." The boy's heart was pounding, but he did not look away. "Yes," he said. Claire studied him a long moment, and the boy could see the struggle in her, the pull of the buyer's offer, and the easy relief of being free at last of this far-off, falling-down place that had hung over her like a debt for so many years. The simple temptation to sign and be done, and never look back. He could see that she had very nearly made up her mind, and so the boy did the bravest thing he had ever done. He stepped forward, and he held out the letter. "Before you decide anything," he said, and his voice shook, but he did not stop. "Please, there's something you need to read first." Claire looked at the folded page in his hand. "What is it?" "It's a letter," the boy said. "She wrote it. Eleanor, the woman who lived here." He swallowed hard. "I found it, upstairs, in a trunk, and I think she'd want you to hear it, before you let this place go." Claire hesitated. Then, slowly, she took the letter. She unfolded it, and she began to read. The boy watched her face as her eyes moved down the page. He watched the weariness in it falter. He watched the careful, made-up distance crack. He watched the words of a woman long gone reach across all the silent years and find their mark. Claire's hand began to tremble. She reached the wish, the simple, aching wish, the hope that the house would not end its days alone, that its doors might open to a child who needed a place to belong. And Claire stopped. She did not finish reading aloud. She did not need to. She simply stood there in the cold, the letter shaking in her hands, the tears running freely down her face. "She wrote this," Claire whispered. "She wrote this, and I never knew." She looked up, at the house, at the boy, at the old man and his wife standing quietly nearby. "All this time," she said, her voice breaking, "I told myself I was just letting go of an old building, settling a thing that needed settling. I told myself she'd understand, that she was gone, and it was only wood and nails now, and it didn't matter." A sob caught in her throat. "But this is what she wanted. This is the one thing she asked for in all the world. And I almost..." She could not finish. The boy stepped closer. "It's not too late," he said softly. "You haven't let it go yet. You can still make it the thing she wanted it to be." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind moved through the long grass. The green things stirred in the garden. The house stood patient in the gray light, as it had stood through all the lonely years, waiting. And then Claire folded the letter, gently, the way you fold something precious that you mean never to lose again. And she pressed it to her heart. "No," she said. The boy's breath caught. But then Claire looked at him, and her tear-streaked face had changed. The weariness was gone. In its place was something clear and certain and warm. "No," she said again. "I'm not selling. Not to that man. Not to anyone who'd tear it down." She drew a shaking breath. This was hers, and this is what she wanted it to be. And I'll not be the one to take that away. Not now. Not after this. Not ever. The old woman let out a soft, broken sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. The old man closed his eyes, and his shoulders eased as though a weight he had been carrying without a word had finally been set down. And the boy stood there in the cold and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not relief, though there was that. Something larger. The feeling of having spoken and of having been heard. The feeling of having reached out a hand to save something, and of feeling the world, for once, reach back and take hold of it. The farm would not be cleared. The house would not end its days alone. And it was not the old man who had saved it. It was not the old woman, or Claire, or any of the grown-ups who had always decided everything before. It was a boy. A quiet, overlooked, half-frozen boy who had finally found his voice. That night, in the warm house, they did not speak much of the buyer or his long, dark car. He would not be coming back. But the boy knew that the larger shadow still remained. His mother was out there, wanting him back, for all the wrong reasons. And though he had saved the farm, he did not yet know if he could save himself. He sat at the table in his own chair by the window, with his own towel on the hook and his own place set before him. The old woman ladled out the soup. The old man told a quiet story about the day's work, and the boy almost smiled. But beneath it all, a question hung in the warm kitchen air. A question none of them said aloud. When the time came, when the choosing came, would the world let a boy stay where he was wanted? Or would it send him back to where he was only wanted for? The boy did not have the answer. Not yet. But he had learned something, out there in the cold, with Eleanor's letter trembling in Claire's hands. He had learned that he was not as powerless as he had always believed. That a quiet voice, once it finally finds the courage to speak, can change the course of things. He had found his voice for the farm. When the time came, he would find it for himself. The night before the boy faced his mother, he did not sleep. He lay in the little room beneath the cedar-scented quilt, and he watched the shadows move slowly across the ceiling. Down the hall, the house was quiet. But inside the boy, nothing was quiet at all. He thought about the picture at the bottom of his pack, the one of a much younger version of himself, standing beside a woman with tired eyes, both of them smiling at something just out of frame. He had carried that picture through every cold room and every lonely night. He had carried it because it was proof. Proof that once, long ago, he had belonged to someone. And now that someone was coming back, not to give him a home, but to take him from the one he had finally found. In the morning, the old man and the old woman were waiting in the kitchen. They did not say much. There was not much that needed saying. The old woman set a hand against his cheek and held it there a moment. The way you hold something you are afraid of losing. The old man met his eyes across the table. "Whatever happens in that room," the old man said, and his voice was low and steady, "you walk in with your head up. You understand me? You've done nothing wrong. Not one single thing. You're a fine young man. And don't you let anybody make you feel otherwise." The boy nodded. His throat was too tight for words. The old woman pressed a piece of warm bread into his hand, though she surely knew he could not eat it. "We'll be right outside that door," she said softly. "The whole time. You're not walking in there alone, sweetheart. Not anymore." And the boy held the warm bread in his cold hands. And somehow, that small thing gave him the strength to go. His mother was thinner than he remembered. She sat across the room in a chair that seemed too large for her, her hands twisting together in her lap. And when the boy walked in, she looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. For a single, treacherous moment, the old hope rose in him, that foolish, stubborn hope that no amount of hurt had ever fully managed to kill. Maybe she would open her arms. Maybe she would say the thing he had waited 3 long years to hear. But she did not open her arms. She looked at him the way you look at something you set down somewhere and only just remembered you owned. "Look how you've grown," she said. And the words, which should have been warm, fell into the room cold. She spoke for a while. She talked about how things were different now, how she was ready this time, how a boy belonged with his mother after all, and how it was past time for him to come home where he belonged. The boy listened. He listened to every word. And the strangest thing was that he was not angry. He had expected anger. He had braced for it through the long, sleepless night. He had imagined the hot, helpless fury he had felt as a younger child, watching a door close behind him on an ordinary afternoon. But what he felt now, sitting there listening to his mother speak of a home that had never once been a home, was something far quieter, something almost like sorrow, because he could hear it now. He was old enough, at last, to hear what lay underneath the words. She did not speak of him. She spoke of having him, of what his coming home would mean. To her, for her. And not once, in all her talking, did she ask the single question a person asks when they truly want someone. Not once did she ask if he was happy. Not once did she ask what he wanted. When she finished, the room fell silent. She looked at the boy, waiting. And the boy looked back at his mother. And then he did the thing he had promised himself he would do. He spoke. "I waited for you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "For a long time, I kept a picture of you in my bag. I used to look at it some nights, even though it hurt, because it was all I had left of the time before everything came apart." He drew a slow breath. "I kept thinking, maybe she'll come back. Maybe she'll change her mind. Maybe one day she'll want me again." His mother's eyes glistened, but the boy did not stop. "And now here you are," he said, "and I can see that you do want me back." He paused, but not the way a person wants someone they love. The words settled over the room like snow. His mother opened her mouth, but no sound came. "I found a place," the boy went on, and his voice grew softer now, almost gentle. "Out here. A house everyone in the world had forgotten. It was falling apart when I found it. Cold, empty, the loneliest place you could imagine. He looked down at his own hands, the calloused, capable hands the work had given him. And I loved it the moment I saw it, he said, because it was just like me, passed over, waiting for somebody who never came. He lifted his eyes again. And these people, he said, and he glanced toward the door, where he knew the old man and the old woman stood waiting. They didn't have to do anything for me. They didn't owe me a thing in this world. They could have turned me back out into the cold and never thought of me again. His voice caught, just for a moment. Instead, they pulled out a chair. They set a place at their table. They asked me what I wanted. And then they listened when I answered. He looked at his mother, steady and clear. That's the difference, he said. That's the whole entire difference. They want me here, just here, not for anything I can do for them, just because I'm me. His mother sat very still. I'm not angry at you, the boy said. Not anymore. I think I understand you better than I used to. I think I understand that some people just aren't able to give what a child needs. And maybe that's not even your fault. Maybe nobody ever gave it to you either. He swallowed. But understanding you doesn't mean I have to go back, because I learned something out here. Something it took me almost losing everything to figure out. He stood a little straighter. Home isn't a place you're owed because of how you were born, he said. Home is a place where somebody's glad you walked through the door, and I've got that now, for the first time in my whole life, and I am not going to give it up. And he was quiet. He had said it. The thing he had carried in his chest through the long, sleepless night. He had found his voice, and he had used it for himself. His mother was silent a long, long while, and the boy watched something move across her face, something complicated and painful, and, in the end, resigned. Because she heard it, she heard the truth in his words. And perhaps, somewhere beneath all the wrong reasons that had carried her down that long road, some small and buried good part of her recognized that the boy was right. She did not argue. She did not fight. She simply sat there a moment longer, looking at the son who had become someone she no longer knew. A boy who had grown, in the time she was gone, into someone with a backbone of his own. And then she nodded. Once. You've turned out better than I had any right to hope, she said quietly. It was, the boy understood, the closest thing to love she had it in her to give. And it was enough. It was enough to let him close the door, gently, on the part of himself that had spent 3 long years waiting for a door to open. She left that afternoon. The boy stood on the porch between the old man and the old woman, and he watched her car go down the long dirt road. Smaller and smaller it grew, past the green of the waking fields, past the leaning post where, soon, something new would stand, until at last it turned out of sight, and was gone. The boy thought perhaps that he might cry. He did not. Instead, what came over him, standing there in the soft gray light, was something he had not expected at all. He felt light, as though a weight he had carried for 3 years, a weight so familiar that he had long ago stopped noticing it was even there, had finally, quietly, been set down. He had spent so long aching to be chosen by the one who had let him go, and now he understood that he did not need her to choose him, because he had been chosen already by two old people in a warm house, by a sleeping farm at the end of a long road, by a woman named Eleanor, who had once written a wish into the empty air and then waited years and years for someone to come and answer it. The boy turned away from the road, and he went back inside to the warm kitchen, where someone was glad that he had walked through the door. The old woman found him on the porch a few evenings later. The worst was past now. The house had settled back into its gentle, ordinary peace, and the spring evenings had grown long and golden, the light lingering over the fields as though it, too, were reluctant to leave such a place. The boy was sitting on the step, watching the last of the day fade. The old woman lowered herself down beside him, slow and careful, the way the years had taught her to move. For a while, they simply sat together in the quiet. And then she spoke. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said softly. "Something I haven't spoken of in a very long time." The boy turned to look at her. He had noticed it over the weeks, the way her eyes would sometimes linger on him a beat too long. The particular softness that came over her when she set a plate before him, or smoothed his hair, or watched him work beside her husband out in the garden. He had not understood it until now. "There was a child once," the old woman said. "Long ago." The boy went very still. "A little one," she said. "Ours." Her hands folded gently in her lap, and the world saw fit to take that little one back far too soon, before we'd hardly had the chance to know each other at all. The boy did not speak. He understood, the way he had always understood such things, that the kindest thing he could do was simply to listen. After that, the old woman went on, her voice low and even, "I closed a door, in here." She touched her chest lightly. "I told myself it was the safer way to live, that if you keep your heart shut tight enough, then nothing in the world can get inside to break it again." She gave a small, sad smile. "And I kept that door shut a long time, years and years of it. My husband, bless his patient soul, he never once pushed. He just waited, the way the truly kind ones do. He left the latch undone, you might say, and he waited to see if I'd ever open it again." She turned then and looked at the boy, and her eyes were bright in the fading light. "And then one cold evening, he came up the drive in that old truck of his, and sitting beside him was a half-frozen boy, looking out at the whole world like he was sure it was about to turn him away again." She reached out and took the boy's hand in both of hers. "And something happened to me, right then and there," she said. "Something I'd long given up on. That door I'd kept shut all those years. It just opened, all on its own, the very moment I laid eyes on you." The boy's throat had gone tight. "I thought you were the one helping me," he said. The old woman smiled at him through the shine of her tears. "Oh, sweetheart, that's the very thing about it. The thing it took an old woman a whole long lifetime to learn." She pressed his hand. "When you take someone in, you think you're the one doing the giving. A roof over their head, a hot meal, a warm place to lay down at night." She shook her head slowly. "But that's not how it truly works. Not at the heart of it. Because they're giving you something back, all the while. something you can hardly even put a name to. She looked out over the darkening fields. They give you a reason, she said. Somebody to set the table for. Somebody to wait up for of an evening. Somebody to fuss over and worry after and love. That old house of ours had gone so quiet, you know. So terribly quiet. And then you came along, and you filled it right back up again. She lifted his hand and pressed it gently to her cheek. You didn't only need us, she said. We needed you. You went and healed something in me that I'd long since given up for lost. And the whole time, you never even knew you were doing it. And the boy understood, then, the thing the old woman had been trying to teach him all along. That belonging is not a thing that flows in only one direction. That to be taken in is also, somehow, to give. That he had not simply been rescued by these two gentle people at the end of a long dirt road. He had, without ever meaning to, done some quiet rescuing of his own. He had walked into a house grown silent with old grief, and he had filled it back up with life, and the knowledge of that settled into him like warmth into cold hands. For so long, he had believed himself to be a burden, a problem, a case to be managed, a number on a list, a child no one quite had room for. But he was not a burden. He was a gift. He had been a gift all along. He had only needed someone to see it. Spring deepened. It came the way spring always seems to. Slowly, and then all at once, the cold loosened its grip on the land. The buried ground softened and grew dark and rich, and the green things the old woman had set into the cleared earth, the ones the boy had once feared might never have the chance to grow at all, pushed up toward the warming sun and unfolded leaf by leaf. The farm was different now, not merely mended, alive. The old man and the boy had finished the larger work over the long weeks of winter. The house wore a fresh coat of paint, white and clean and bright. The porch stood square and steady beneath their feet. The barn roof was whole. The windows that had once stared out blank and hollow now caught the morning light and threw it back, glad and gleaming. And the place did not stay quiet for long. Word had spread, the way word always does in a small and gentle place. The story of the sleeping farm at the end of the road. The story of the boy who had come out of nowhere and brought it back from ruin. The story of Eleanor's wish, written into the empty air and answered at long last after all the lonely years. And one by one, people began to come. A neighbor arrived with a truck full of fence posts and an afternoon to spare. Another came bearing seedlings and an armful of old tools and a fond memory of Eleanor he was glad to share with anyone who would listen. An elderly woman who had known Eleanor as a girl walked the rows of the new garden with tears standing in her eyes, and she said, in a voice thick with the years, that it looked just exactly the way it used to. They came to help. They came to remember. They came, the boy slowly came to understand, because the farm had been a part of all of them once, long ago, and to watch it return to life was to watch a piece of their own past come quietly home. Claire came too. She had not gone back to her far-off life, not all the way. She came and went now, drawn again and again to the place she had so nearly let slip through her fingers, and each time she came, the boy saw the weariness in her grow a little lighter. She would have loved this, Claire said one afternoon, standing at the edge of the garden, watching the neighbors at their work, listening to the easy laughter drift across the fields. Eleanor. This is exactly what she always wanted. A house full of life and noise again. She turned to the boy, and her eyes were warm. "You gave her that," she said. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? After all these years, you gave her the one thing in the world she ever asked for." The boy did not know what to say to that, so he simply looked out across the farm, at the people in the green and the bright spring light. And he let himself feel the whole of it, the fullness of it, the life of it, the home of it. There came a day, that spring, when the farm held a kind of gathering. It was not planned exactly. It simply happened, the way good things sometimes have a way of happening. The garden had given up its first small harvest. The old woman had baked until the whole house was warm and golden with the smell of it. The neighbors had drifted over the way neighbors do, and before anyone quite knew how it had come about, there were long tables set out beneath the wide spring sky. There was laughter on the porch. There were children running through the very fields where, not so long ago, a lonely boy had walked entirely alone. The boy stood at the edge of it all a moment, just watching, just taking it in. The house, alive and bright. The garden, green and growing. The old man, in the middle of some tall tale that had the neighbors slapping their knees. The old woman, moving among the tables with her endless plates of food, in her element at last. Claire, smiling in a way she had not known how to smile when she first arrived, weary and guilt-worn, all those weeks ago. And all around, the murmur of gathered voices, the warmth of people together, the simple, ordinary miracle of a quiet place made loud again with living. The boy felt a hand come to rest on his shoulder. It was the old man. "What are you thinking about, son?" he asked. The boy was quiet a moment. "That I keep waiting for it to end," he said finally. "Every morning, I wake up, and somewhere in the back of my head, I'm already thinking, today's the day somebody tells me to pack." The old man nodded slowly. He understood that kind of waiting. "There's no bag to pack, son," he said. "Not anymore." He looked out at the fields, at the children, at the long tables full of people. "You're not passing through this place. You hear me? You're part of it now, woven right into it." He paused. "And a man doesn't get asked to leave the thing he helped build with his own 2 hands. The boy did not answer. He looked out at the farm he had carried back to life, at the windows he had cleaned, and the porch he had mended, and the garden he had pulled out of the wild with his own raw hands. And for the first time in his life, he let himself believe it. The old man squeezed his shoulder once and said nothing more. He did not need to. Some things land deeper in the silence after the words than in the words themselves. And the two of them stood there together a while, the old and the young, watching the life they had built spill out warm across the fields. There was one more thing the boy did that spring. He did it on a quiet morning, before the others were up and about. He walked down the long dirt drive, all the way to the very end, to where the property met the wider road, to the mailbox, the leaning, rusted, weather-worn mailbox, with the name on its side faded by rain and sun until it was barely a whisper of what it once had been. The boy had brought with him a small can of paint and a brush, and he knelt down in the cool of the morning dew, and he set to work. First he set the post right. He straightened it and he braced it. and he painted over the soft and weathered wood until it stood up tall and proud again, the way it must have stood long ago. Then he turned to the box itself, painting it slow and careful, the way the old man had taught him through all the long weeks of winter. Measure twice, take your time, do the thing right. And then, when the box was clean and bright and whole once more, he painted a name upon its side, his own. He sat back on his heels in the wet grass, and he looked at it, his name, on a mailbox, at the end of a long dirt road, in front of a house no one would ever call empty again. And something rose up inside the boy's chest, something so large and so warm that it brought the sting of tears to his eyes. Because a name painted on a mailbox is such a small thing. And it is also, somehow, everything. It means a person has a place in the world. It means there is a spot of earth where letters might come, addressed to them, expecting them, certain of finding them right there where they ought to be. It means somebody, somewhere, knows where to look for you. It means that you are not lost anymore. For 3 long years, the boy had been little more than a name in someone else's file. A name on a list of children that no one quite had the room for. A name passed from hand to hand, from room to room, settling truly nowhere at all. And now, at last, his name belonged somewhere. His name had a home. He rose to his feet, and he turned, and he looked back up the long drive at the farm. The house caught the morning light, white and clean and shining. A thin ribbon of smoke rose lazily from the chimney, where the old woman had surely stirred the fire to life and set the coffee on. The garden was green. The fields were waking. And somewhere inside those bright walls, 2 old and gentle voices were beginning the soft, ordinary music of another day together. The boy stood very still, and he let it all soak down into him. The boy who had come walking up this road one rainy night with nowhere in all the world to go was gone now, and in his place stood someone new. Someone who had found a sleeping farm and made it bloom again. Someone who had found his own voice and learned, at long last, how to use it. Someone the world had passed over, and who had taken that very hurt and built from it a home. Not the home he had been born into, a better one, the kind a person makes with their own 2 hands, the kind that opens its doors to take you in when you have nothing left to offer but your willingness to stay. The morning sun climbed higher into the soft spring sky, and the boy walked back up the long dirt drive toward the warm house and the green garden, and the 2 old souls who had been glad from that very first cold evening that he had wandered in through their door. Behind him, at the end of the road, the mailbox stood bright in the morning light. The post stood tall. The fresh paint gleamed, and on the side where once a faded name had whispered of someone long gone and long missed, a new name shone now, clear and bold and unafraid. A name that no amount of rain would wash away. A name that, after all the long and lonely roads, had somewhere at last to come home to. And as the boy reached the foot of the porch steps, the door swung open before he could so much as touch it. The old woman stood there in the doorway, the warm golden light of the kitchen spilling out behind her, and she smiled at him. She smiled at him the way you smile at someone you have waited your whole long life to find. "There you are," she said. "Come on inside now, sweetheart. Breakfast is getting cold, and there's plenty of it." And the boy smiled back at her, and he climbed the steps, and he went inside, and the door closed behind him, soft and warm and certain. Not the way a door closes on someone, but the way a door closes around someone, keeping the cold out, keeping him in, and that, he understood now, had been the whole difference all along. He was home. Not because the world had finally made room for him, but because he had found the one place that had been holding its door open the entire time. And out at the end of the long dirt road, in the bright, clean morning, a mailbox stood waiting, with a name on its side, ready at last for someone to come home.